2, 1.
Good afternoon, everybody. Enjoy your cookie. Actually, I've been saying for weeks how brave you all were to come out in the terrible weather. And today I'm thinking, how come you came when it's so beautiful? It's absolutely beautiful outside. This has been such a bizarre winter. Have you guys had weird weather where you've been?
It's been unseasonably like Seattle in Burbank. It's been pouring rain there for like a good month or so. It finally lightened up in the last week.
And you're back east.
Yeah, Virginia, where it's been perfectly normal. We're always perfectly normal.
No.
Green Lake Wopagon.
Yeah.
Yes.
I guess I keep getting updates from C.J. Boggs, who started his book tour here and then went back to Denver, where he's been trapped for what do they call it? The bombogenesis or something, whatever this.
The bomb cyclone.
That's it, seriously. So, meantime, we just put up with a little rain. Well, in any case, it's great to see you both back here. Thank you so much for coming. Brad Parks on the far right has an exciting new book with an exciting new premise we will tell you about. And Glen is here with the fourth book in his series, which is a lot of fun. So, Brad, where'd you get this terrific idea?
So you're really starting with how did you get your ideas?
The dumbest question, the dumbest interviewer question ever.
Barbara Peters, world famous Barbara Peters, and she can't come up with where do you get your ideas?
I have to tell you, Ari, I'm going to confess, I have totally blanked out on the name of your book. I was forced to come up with I just saw it in the back room.
Which I must say, I finished on the plane coming here this morning. Heck of a read.
Thanks,
Love
man.
It is heck of a read. So I was going to ask a more intelligent question, and then I realized as I opened my mouth, I had to find something generic. So Brad would tell you the name of the book.
So where did I come up with the idea for the last act? I mean, who knows where any of these ideas come from, basically. But, my thing is, I come up with about 10 ideas for a book a week, 10 and a half of which are really bad. Like, I don't know if you do the same thing, but, I come up with a lot of bad ideas. Like, I had one just last week I was sharing with my wife. It started with a dream. And I think dreams can be fertile ground, right?
Yeah.
And I had this dream where this female friend of mine was trapped in this domestic violence situation. And I couldn't get her out of it. It was this very helpless feeling, and I woke up feeling so helpless. And the first thing that popped in my head was like, ooh, some kind of domestic violence vigilante, right? But then I'm like, nah, it feels like that's been done, right? And it's also not very me, going around beating people up. It's also not very evolved. We've come up with better ways to address violence than with violence. So I'm kind of spitballing this, and then I'm like, I know a white collar domestic violence vigilante, right? And I say this to my wife, and she's like, so wait, he messes with the woman and you mess with his credit rating? Is that?
Yeah. I did actually conclude my review of your book by saying that in other hands this could have been violent, but you are a gentler writer.
Yeah, that is true. So basically, every once in a while I do come up with that idea that I don't immediately forget or that doesn't get ridiculed by my wife right away.
Yeah.
And I always know it's one of those ideas because I keep coming back to it. I'll find myself out in a run and not doing anything, and that idea comes back, and I go, oh, what about that? So the premise, for those of you who don't know, is an out-of-work actor who is hired by the FBI to play what I call the role of a lifetime. He has to go to prison, pretend to be an inmate, cozy up with a disgraced banker who has documents pertaining to money laundering that can bring down a ruthless Mexican drug cartel, right? But the premise, the out-of-work actor hired by the FBI, I probably had that idea 4 or 5 years ago and could just kind of never get around to writing it. And finally, actually, so if we're talking real here, right? And I don't know if you've done this. So I was this was about midway through 2017, which, you need to, because we always I hand in my books a year ahead of time, right? So I need to be finished with my 2019 book really by the beginning of 2018. So midway through,
at least 10. Sorry,
yeah, I know.
At least 10 months or so.
Right.
Yeah.
So by July, I'm supposed to be probably about 4 months in, and I was writing this book. I was about 60,000 words in, and I got this sinking, awful feeling that anybody could figure out who the bad guy was, you know, like, which is the one thing you can't do. So I sent it to my agent with no commentary whatsoever, and she calls me up the next day. She read it overnight, and the first words out of her mouth were, "So I think I know who the bad guy is." So it's like, okay, that's done. So I kind of had to go like back to the well of those ideas, and the out-of-work actor hired by the FBI was like, "All right, let's chase that one."
Is that why the white-collar domestic violence person came in and late in the second act?
Yeah.
No.
He's more of a side character, right?
Yeah.
So you could think from all that it was really Don Winslow writing this book, but as I said, Glen is you're Glen, Brad, is a gentler writer, and so it wasn't going to turn into be like the cartel or the border, but nonetheless, it does make a change for Middle Eastern terrorists to have cartel guys as bad guys. There's always a compelling threat is essential for the kind of book that you want to write.
Oh yeah,
It's going to be a thriller.
The
And I
cartel
want
is
to thank
plenty
you.
dangerous for sure.
It is, and I want to thank you for not making it domestic violence, because if I have to read one more, I am going. Honestly, I hunted forever to find a British book for April for our British Crime Club that was not a Trust No One or domestic violence, psychological thriller book. They have just flooded the market. It's really hard to find, like a police procedural or, something more.
Right, traditional.
Do you have the feeling of relief as an author when you hear that and know that that's not the next book you're working on? You're not halfway
So
through
let me
domestic
tell you about my
violence
next
going,
one.
I think here's my objection, and it doesn't. I get tired of betrayal as the mechanism for the story, because ultimately, if you're writing a book which is all about everybody betraying everybody else, you don't like the people involved. And then you don't really want to spend the book with them.
I call that the douchebag factor. Right?
Well, elegantly put, but but I think that's it. I'm tired of reading these people and thinking that everyone you know or love, is set to kill you or betray you, and it can be, parents and children or spouses or, whatever. And it's just not a universe I especially want to be spending time in.
And it's sort of,
especially with the world all around us behaving like that. Why do that in a book?
when you have those sorts of works where no one is trustworthy and everyone's making chess moves against everybody else, it sort of forces the book into being more of a mental exercise than an emotional one, because you're not generally identifying with anybody in the book, and so it just sort of becomes. I think it removes it from the reader.
And all that said, I do think your idea of sending an actor undercover into prison is a really a great one. There are all kinds of snitches, but mostly they're there in order to cut a better deal for themselves.
Right.
Like, for example, the people that outed this whole university scandal were doing it. One of them agreed to be a snitch in order to try to get less prison time or something. So it's great to have a guy with a mission going in, rather, there is some payoff for him, if I recall.
Oh yeah, he's being paid by the FBI,
right?
And that's the thing.
It's not free.
No, it's not free. And he has just learned. He learns early on in the book. I don't want to spoil too much, that his fiancée is pregnant. So he's and basically I made him a former child Broadway star, but is now 27 years old. So he can't get those kid parts he used to get. I made him 5'4", so he can't be the leading man. But then he's also still too young to get most character roles. So he's kind of, without any real place in the theater. And this was the part that I kind of hooked into. The character's name is Tommy Jump. He has this thing he loves, acting, right? And it's what he's done since he was very small. And for me, that's what writing is. I mean, I got my first paycheck as a writer when I was 14. I have absolutely no other marketable skills, believe me. And so, I could really identify with a character who was trying to really cling to this thing that he loved.
You didn't read a biography of Mickey Rooney somewhere in this, did you?
No.
No.
Is that what happened to him?
Well, there was, he was small. He was a child actor. It was hard for him to be a romantic lead, as you said. He wasn't old enough to be, and there was an awful limbo period, in his career, which Shirley Temple managed it in a different way. But being a child star and then wanting to act the whole rest of your life is actually setting yourself up for some really tough years. So I thought about that. So Glen, not to ignore you.
So Glen, where do you get your ideas?
You're never going to let me live that down, are you? I see it coming. Fourth in series you're really still enjoying the
Yes.
guy that you're writing about.
Yeah, I'm discovering more about the character Van Shaw with every book, and really sort of enjoying his journey. I have not had the books happen in real time. It hasn't been 4 years
Right.
in chronological order. It's been more. It's been closer to 2 almost exactly since the first book.
A wise decision.
Yeah, well, largely because it's a time of major change in his life. He's on leave from the military in the first book. He's just mustered out of it in the second. There's a lot that happens in that first year or so, both just in terms of his adventures, but also his personal growth. And I wanted to explore that in greater detail rather than falling into the trap that Michael Connelly has often said that he found himself in, where he decided to age Bosch in real time, and then Bosch got so popular he got stuck with it, and now has a challenge.
Rankin made the same decision.
Yeah, and so I didn't want to go down that. I do want Van to age and grow, but he's not going to be doing it in real time.
But you also don't want to do it like Sue Grafton, where you find yourself stuck in 1986 when it's 2010, and having to suddenly you're essentially writing like a historical.
It would solve a lot of problems, like I said. The amount of sidestepping you got to do around technology, satellites, everything these days is amazing.
You know, but readers are really complicit in this. I mean, look at Robert Parker. Spencer went from being a Korean War veteran to Desert Storm. Nobody paid any attention as he went on forever. You know, in his 40s with a military history.
Travis McGee, who was one of the primary influences, my influences as a reader growing up, and then one of the influences of Van, of course, working on the outskirts of society. Is he did the same thing. He mentioned Korea specifically in the early books,
right.
And then it became this vague war in the jungle that he would quite refer to by name later on in the series. As he had to sidestep those things as well.
So what happens in book 4? He's got a few life decisions behind him.
He's got a few life decisions behind him. In book 4, the inciting incident, as they call it, is he's living his life in Seattle. Van is, and he gets a call, voicemail actually, from his friend from book 2, Leo Pack, who was a friend of his in the Rangers. And Leo has been arrested forcibly in a small town called Mercy River in central Oregon, which is in the high plains, arid desert badlands of Oregon. Van, of course, journeys to Mercy River to find out what's going on, and finds to his surprise that the town that weekend is playing host to hundreds of special operations veterans who are there for an annual raucous party / charity drive called the Rally. And this was sort of inspired by my learning about the biennial Ranger Rendezvous that the Army holds for the 75th Regiment back east. And I thought, well, what if there was one of those on the West Coast? And what if it was privately run and a little less regulated, shall we say, and sort of it came out of that. And I thought the notion of a town literally being invaded by soldiers was a lot of fun.
And a bunch of guys who know how to use guns and drinking a lot of beer.
Yes.
Yes. Nothing unusual is going to happen here.
One of my contacts that fact checks the books for me and who I interview about stuff told me some things about the real Ranger Rendezvous, but he said, and then he went into some detail and he said, yeah, I thought I'd shoot better than I did in the shooting competitions, but I was really hungover, and come to think of it, I don't remember Saturday at all. He's like, okay, all right.
So actually, I wanted to, if you don't mind me taking over the question, I was really impressed with how you wrote Rangers, that you had that culture down, it seemed, and I know that's not your personal background.
It's not. No, I'm not a bit.
Tell me about your Ranger.
Sure.
Research.
I sort of backed into having Van be a ranger before the first book as I was writing it, because I wanted him to break ties with his grandfather, who had raised him as a thief, and go away for 10 years. I didn't want him to just go away, move to Omaha. I wanted him to go away,
or go to prison,
right? Which was an idea that I played with for a while. So I decided, okay, 18, fit, smart. No money, no prospects. Military might look like a decent option for him. Went into the Army, found a home in the 75th Regiment, and enjoyed it. And the reason I made it the Rangers is I was interviewing a friend of mine who was a Special Forces veteran for 10 years. And he was describing the various branches of Special Operations. And he described the Rangers, of what they do. They're light infantry, they're shock troops, raiders. They go anywhere in the world in 18 hours. accomplish generally a single mission, accomplish that, and get out. They don't stay where they are. They go in, do a job, and leave. And as he put it, and I'm going to clean up the language a little bit, knocking down doors and blowing stuff up. And I thought, that's my guy at age 19. That's exactly what he would want to do, and he would probably be very good at that, being a tactical thinker. And so started researching the Rangers, read some excellent books about it. By hook and by crook, met a number of veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan who had served in the 75th. And they, some of them are still my contacts that I talk to, just to make sure things are not only factually accurate, but mindset accurate. That the event is thinking the right way about a situation.
Yeah, no, and that came through in the book. Like, I felt like it was really, you were writing with a great deal of authority, and I believed it. If you were lying to me, I didn't know. I believed you all the way.
Thank you. Which is the best compliment any fiction writer can get. It's like, I couldn't spot the lies.
Like,
Perfect.
I knew you were basically, like, a hippie raised on a sailboat. So, like, I didn't think that you were, possibly really had a Ranger background, but I was doubting for a second. I'm like, did Glenn do some of this stuff? So that's a good sign.
No, my parents were unusual. We moved aboard a sailboat when I was 9, and I grew up aboard in the Seattle area and sailing about and things like that. Hippies, not quite right. It's more like keeping regular polite society at a remove. They just wanted to be at a remove from things, and I think that tailors a lot of Van's experience too. I'm sure, to turn it around, I'm sure that your theater expertise played into a lot of Tommy's background as well. As a person with a theater degree who met his wife doing theater, I spotted a lot of the same actor's mindset in that with Tommy.
Although I have no training in theater at all.
Okay.
So, which probably...
See, I didn't spot the lies.
There it is. But I've been around theater, and I know how theater people think. And I think also I found there's a lot, even prior to writing this book, that theater and writing have in common. Because when you are on stage, so basically writing is performing on the page, right? Because when you're on stage, and I've done, like, not probably as much as you, but I've done some bad community theater, some high school stuff, but, like, I love...
You get great stories out of bad community theater.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So, but, no two shows are ever the same, right? And that's because every audience is a little different. And part of being an actor is being tuned to the audience that night, right? And, like, what's working with that audience? Are the sight gags just working a little better? And so I'll kind of play up some of the physical comedy. Or do I get the sense that they're just hanging on my every word? And so I can...
Sorry, I wasn't listening.
Yeah, right. So not that yet. The drunk Friday night audience, that's not going to work.
Fridays are notoriously rough.
Right, exactly. So, but it's the same thing when you're writing. But the harder part is the audience is not right in front of you. And thank goodness for you, because you do not want to see what we look like when we're doing this. But I feel that sense of, like, my antenna being out for the audience all the time when I'm writing. And I want to keep you just as entertained as I do when I'm on the stage. So yeah, that was kind of my way of really getting into Tommy.
Nice.
Obviously,
So
I love
that's
musical
kind of
theater.
an argument for going on book tour, in a sense, is that you get to connect not just with people posting reviews online, but actual fans doing things.
Yeah.
I was thinking, I love the comment you made there. We have this really terrific copy editor for Poison Pen Press, now Source Books, and over the years, she's hardly ever made a mistake. But both she and the author, I was reading along happily through this book until I got to the fact that the guy was an Army SEAL. And I called Glen right up in my head. I said, So I looked up a review just to make sure, and sure enough,
All right,
Ranger, I said.
I have an ethical dilemma then. So I just got asked to blurb this book, right? And I'm reading the beginning. It's like, the question is, like, how obnoxious do I want to be? And she had, like...
Is there a limit?
Yeah, and probably not with me, but she had an amateur boxer making decent money. And I'm like, no, that's not what amateur means. And, like, do you be like.
Unless it's the Olympics, or
Right.
sadly,
know.
sadly, while that sounds
But
like
should
an
I-
oxymoron, apparently it is
That
less
it
and
is
less.
that it
so.
has slipped through people who obviously are not sports people like
Yeah.
this far and gotten to me like, do I say something or is that just obnoxious? I don't know.
Well, I mean, over the years, I hear most often, especially from guys writing books, that the mistakes that you make that come back to get you the most, and that people are out to get you the most, is with guns.
Uh-huh.
The gun guys are
Guns
like,
and cars. Yeah.
yeah, well, okay, cars too.
But guns are the
But sometimes it's the most obvious stuff that can trip you up. For example, Army SEAL, which I love. But
He slapped the cartridge back in his revolver. You know, like,
which is, if you think of it, one of the real arguments against self-publishing is that you really do need eyes on books, more than one set, preferably several sets, to catch stuff. Because it seemed right to you when you wrote it, and then apparently it seemed right to the next person who read it. And it's all too easy. The romance community, I'm gathering, has largely been taken over by self-publishing for I don't know what reasons, but I've been hearing a lot about it. The mystery and thriller community really hasn't in the same way, and I think part of it is that you're held to a high standard. All kidding aside,
Right.
you really are held to a high standard of accuracy by fans. They're there not to just have fun, but to learn things.
Right.
And if you're misleading them, or whatever.
Or lying. Which we do.
Noticeably lying.
You
Yeah.
perforce have immersed yourself in a culture that you didn't actually serve in, but nonetheless you've become something of an expert.
Yeah, well,
you
at least
and Nick Petrie.
at a very surface level, I think I have. I like a lot of authors or anybody who makes films or anything like that. You research what you need to know for that particular film along the way, rather than necessarily trying to learn everything about that. But again, the more you learn, the better you maybe understand the mindset, and that does.
That was the point I
Yeah.
meant. You had to immerse yourself in the life this character would have led. How that plays out in terms of the mechanics of the plot's a whole different thing. But we want to feel like he really was an Army Ranger, or he really was an actor with a pregnant girlfriend and no income. Going, now what?
Right.
When it comes along, and I thought both of you did a terrific job in the setup. So one of the questions that has been arising recently at events, and not because anybody hasn't done it well, but it's really important that you deliver an ending as good as the beginning. So if you got this great setup, how scary is it to write your way towards the end and wonder to yourself, is my end going to be as great as the way I started this book?
Well, we're on live broadcast right now, so I can't say what my agent said to me as she was reading this one, which was, well, you can imagine what the word was, but she's like, I was reading along and you were doing so great, but about midway through I got so nervous about the ending, and I was just saying, please, Brad, don't F it up. Because she loved the setup, she loved the characters, she loved everything. Just please don't mess up. And actually, I nearly did F up the ending, in as much as this book, I say, is like, I don't know about you, if you feel this way, but I say books are like my children in a couple of different ways. One, I can't pick a favorite, but also in that they really take on their own personality in ways that seemingly have no input from their creator a lot of times. So before I was a parent, I thought I had this fallacy. Do we have any parents in the room here? Yeah. You have this belief that you will be able to shape them and mold them and create, and then they come out of the box like completely whatever they are, and you're just hanging on for dear life, right? And it's the same thing with these books, right? So, and the other thing is they do kind of take on this personality, and this book for me was constantly, it was the book that surprised me. It just kept surprising me at every turn. So it was one of those things where you go into a book thinking of a twist or two in mind, right? That, I mean, those ended up being in about 9th place on the list of twists in this book, because I just kept coming to a point where I'm like, well, I could make that happen, but oh my God, that would be much cooler. And I didn't even think that was going to happen. Let's do that, and I kind of kept following it and following it and following it until I got my characters in such a horrible situation. I had no idea how I was going to get them out. Oh boy. So I did what I always do when I get stuck. I go for a run. And normally, a mile or two in, so running is my thing. It's my jam.
I get it. Yeah.
Because there's something about it engages the conscious brain enough in this repetitive thing, and it allows the subconscious to just kind of kick out crazy stuff. And normally, mile 2 in again. But this time I finished the run, nothing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I can't run every day because I have a bulky knee. So 2 days later I run again, still nothing. 2 days after that, another run, and I'm about 4 miles into a 5-mile run when finally it comes to me. And I raise my arms. I ran home like Rocky, So I called the end of this book, Barbara, it was a 3-run problem that I finally solved.
Like Holmes's, was it 3-pipe problem?
Right, exactly.
3-pipe problem?
Or even
Right,
better
there
on television, a 3-patch problem because he was trying to give up nicotine. That was the best line in the whatever, with Benedict Cumberbatch in the very first episode when he got to the 3-patch problem. I loved it. Anyway.
But you did ask a weighty question, though, and how do you...
part of the reason I asked it is I think in many ways this is your most inspired idea. It really raises the stakes and makes it scarier. If you have a really great idea.
All my crappy ideas, I could have just given them a really flaccid ending and it wouldn't have mattered. Is that?
I think what it made me realize is that the more you take it up at the beginning, the more you are compelled to, as I say, come to an end that equals it, or there's disappointment all the way around. No, I wasn't critiquing your books in general. I just really liked this idea. When I started it, I wondered to myself how you were going to, carry it through.
I found myself wondering the same thing,
Okay.
Barbara.
I wasn't running with you, so I didn't know.
That's the impact that the reader is going to have, too, as they're going through the book, right?
Yeah. And the beautiful thing is...
You've written yourself into a corner.
I've written myself into a corner.
And now you have to write your way out.
Yeah.
And if you can't immediately see it, the reader's not going to see it either.
However, Brad has a slight advantage over you in the sense that nobody has to survive this book. I'm not saying that I would have recommended that Death Meets All would have been the best ending, but the advantage to writing a standalone book is that there is no safety net. Anyone in the book can die, whereas you're writing a series, and unless there's dramatic, this is the end of the tetralogy.
Right. You trust it won't end with mid-sentence with somebody sneaking up behind Van and shooting him in the head. So, yeah.
It could.
It could. But
that would be a good end for the series rather than having them just, ooze away. But probably too soon.
But it usually is the same notion of, you want those plates, razor-sharp plates, spinning, enough of them that the reader can't tell, okay, how is all of this going to resolve? Because if the hero makes one move, one bad thing happens. If he makes another move, a worse thing happens. What are you going to get out of this? And so it is the same sort of thing of trying to set yourself into a situation that has no good recourse.
So the people at risk are the ensemble cast, whoever series character. That's why sometimes authors do kill off a series character that you love, because somebody at some point has to, right.
There have to be some stakes, yeah. Hopefully we don't get into the trap of using killing off series characters just to try to make fake emotional impact, because I think that is a danger that series can have. Better, I think, to have different sorts of emotional gut punches than that.
So, Brad, what did you want to ask him about the plot, since I intruded into your conversation?
So it's actually, it's kind of I was wondering if you were aware of this, like, you're sitting right behind a Jack Reacher book, and it felt in a good way like a very Reacher-ish kind of setup, like because you're sending him into this small town, and immediately there's the constable that you're like, and by the way, a constable. I know.
Small towns have constables.
Yeah, I know, which is great though, because it just gives it that that kind of us versus them. He's the outsider. Did you feel Reacher-ish as you were doing it? Did that occur to you?
It is Van out of his regular environs of Seattle along the way. Of course, Reacher is the wanderer. Van usually is not. So, there's advantages and disadvantages of that. I like Van having a home turf and having a family, an ersatz family that he's put together, and these regular characters that are in most of the books. But kicking him out of his comfort zone and getting to play with some of those small town tropes and Old West tropes, you and I both have poker games in our books,
right?
Along the way, it's like, well, if he's in an old town and there's a saloon, there's going to be a poker game. I wanted to have that as part of the book. Right. So, but it is a bit of that wandering samurai sort of thing with this book. Yeah.
very cool.
I think it's also a surprise to a lot of people that Oregon, which we all think of as, wet, roses and all, can actually have an eastern part that is more deserty. So I thought it was
very much.
interesting that you took him to that side of Oregon. It's the mountains, right? The rain falls on the
Yeah, it's
west
high,
side
it's,
of the...
it's high plains. Yeah, the mountain, exactly right. The much like in Washington State, the east and the west sides of the states are very distinct in that the rain tends to fall to the west for the most part. The east has a lot of forested land, certainly,
Right.
but it also has a lot of very high ground, very arid ground. My daughter and I went on a location scouting trip and saw
yeah?
many deer, bighorn sheep, saw wildlife up the wazoo, and there's just a ton of just brush and rivers and incredible rock formations that you just don't generally associate with the Pacific Northwest.
So were the Rangers drawn to this area because of the geographical challenges, or just was
Well,
it
part
an
of it's
expensive place to meet?
yeah,
or-
part of it's the background that some of them have in the area that they know it, and they were just sort of able to make an enclave there that made sense for them. I think General McComber, who runs the rally with the charity drive and celebration, already had ties there for the most part and set them up accordingly.
So you got them there, but did we actually mention what you call it the inciting incident? I like instigating incident because
Okay.
it's harder to say. But what kicks off your action?
Well,
and then
it's
you probably don't
Leo,
want to go
Leo getting arrested.
Okay.
That happens in the first
Right.
chapter, and Van hightails it to Seattle to find out what's going on, and just determines that the rally is there at the same time. But Leo has been accused of killing the local gun shop owner,
okay.
Earl Sharples, who, in addition to being the local gun store owner, has a number of other side hustles that he's got going on along the way, and so there's a lot to be discovered about him as well.
It's an interesting time to write about a gun shop owner.
It is an interesting time to write about a gun shop owner, and it just seemed natural that that would be kind of a locus point for guys coming into town and setting up shooting competitions. There'd be a lot of business going through that gun shop.
Yeah, absolutely. And where there's business, there's money.
Right.
All of the money, which is a thing that we could say in both of your books would be true, right?
Oh yeah, follow the money.
Follow the money.
So mine actually has the crime that the FBI is trying to break here is money laundering, and this is actually based on a real thing that actually happened. So if we want to actually really trace the development of how did I get the idea, right? And I feel like this is not.
Did you turn it off by accident?
I might have turned it off. Oh, okay, I turned it
Very
off by
good.
accident. There we go. So I knew I had this set up of out-of-work actor, and he was going to be hired by the FBI, and I was like, well, what does the FBI do, right? And the first thing that popped in my head was money laundering. All right. So I spent a good portion of my life in northern New Jersey. So I thought I kind of knew a thing or two about money laundering, because basically in every town,
Cottage industry.
in every town in northern New Jersey, there's that one pizzeria that, like, the pie isn't very good. Nobody ever seems to go there, yet it's always in business. And, guys with crooked noses hanging out. So, I know everything I need to know about money laundering. But no, because it turns out in the 21st century, criminals like to move their money around just like the rest of us do with the push of a button. And they have found a very willing set of co-conspirators in that in banks, large commercial banks. Those are the worst money launderers of the 21st century. So HSBC, BNP Paribas, recently Danske Bank got nailed with this. I set mine or patterned it after Wachovia Bank, which is a bank, I don't think it was out here, was it?
No,
It's
I'm
more
trying
southeast.
There was something here that merged with it, though. And I'm trying
Wells
to-
Fargo, yeah. Yeah,
Was it
which,
Wells-
and we all know Wells Fargo is, everything's on the up and up with them, so don't worry. And actually, coincidentally, I was a Wachovia customer while the following was occurring. They had a relationship with currency exchange houses in Mexico, where basically anybody could walk in with the proverbial wrinkled bag of pesos, and for a small fee that Wachovia was happy to collect, have it turned into American greenbacks and sent to an account at Wachovia, which is not at all an invitation to launder money to the cartels, right? So over the course of about 4 years, $378 billion went back and forth between Mexico and the United States. And some of it was legit, like guest workers coming, they wanted to send money back to their family, whatever. But some of it Well, actually, Wachovia couldn't tell you, which is the whole point. You know, there's this thing in banking called know your customer. You have to know your customer. It's one of the most basic regulations in banking, and Wachovia had no clue who was on the Mexico end of this thing. So, and this is dying again.
Here, take mine.
All right. So, so this all got discovered when Mexican authorities seized an airplane, a DC-9 plane, so like a big commercial airliner, that had been bought by the Sinaloa cartel and had been stuffed full of with about $100 million of cocaine. So, like, yes, go ahead, build all the wall you want to. The cartel is going to laugh at it as it's flying over it at, several thousand feet, right? So the DEA starts going, okay, wait a second. How the hell did Sinaloa buy an airplane, a commercial airplane, a huge commercial airplane? And it turns out they bought it the same way I was buying my breakfast cereal at the time, which is out of an account with Wachovia. This is all real. This is all true. Now, I have a question for you, gentle readers. Wachovia has been caught laundering money for the most notorious drug cartel on the planet. It is the very direct consequence of bringing this poison onto American streets. How many Wachovia executives went to jail because of this? No, wait! Don't answer yet. Because I would like to remind you that here in America, we have the highest rate of incarceration of any major industrialized nation. Our rates of incarceration are higher than Russia and China combined, right? And, of course, we all know that this is because we're winning the war on drugs, right? We just lock up enough people. So, yeah, obviously, how many Wachovia executives went to jail? Zero. Which actually gave me a real problem with this. So I was kind of getting all fired up, like, money laundering, this is awesome, this is great, except I realized, like, I can't spend 300 pages getting you fired up about money laundering and then have it be, well, and then what happens to the evil banker? Nothing. He paid a fine and walked away. I mean, like, so what really happened in real life, Wachovia got what is called a deferred prosecution agreement, which is the federal government says, you have 12 months to cut out that awful illegal behavior you've been doing, or we're going to get very serious with you. Which is, not to make this political, but how many of the black drug dealers that they bust on the street, do they make the same offer? Do they I'm sure they all get extended the same courtesy. Like, now, young man, you better cut this out. If we come back to this corner 12 months from now and you're still dealing these drugs, there are going to be consequences, right? So yeah, I had to, like, basically do in my fiction what we all wish reality had done, which is throw the damn banker in jail. So I had to, diverge from reality and go from there.
Well, I think that's a big part of why we like to write what we write. Is we get to create our own justice when that's really hard to come by.
Right.
This, yeah.
Well, and obviously Van. That is what Van.
Yeah.
That's what we call a good segue because the
was.
evidence. I mean, and I don't know how much you want to give away. I was worried for his buddy. The evidence is overwhelming against him to begin with.
Yeah. Let's see if this is on. Testing. All right, there we go. Okay.
You gotta keep your thumb off the button.
I am. But then the light goes out, and I didn't trust him. All right.
Hang on.
So
we obviously need new batteries. Patrick King, are you up front?
So Van is very
PK?
much about
We need batteries.
law, justice, two very different things. And Van is not a vigilante. Van actually tries to be as law-abiding as he can, given his background and propensity and skills. But he's very much all about trying to do the right thing in the right moment, as tough as that is on him and sometimes the people around him. And sometimes that morally that makes for some very tough decisions. It certainly does in Mercy River, where he is forced to cross some lines in Mercy River that he does not want to, but must for a variety of reasons.
But that's fun.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, especially with a
yeah.
serious character, when you find yourself stretching a serious character in ways you've never had before. I mean, I know that's satisfying as a reader. I love seeing that, and as a writer, again,
absolutely.
Like, that's how you get to know your guy better.
Yeah. And it's a lot of fun. I'm in the midst of course, writing the next book right now. It's a lot of fun having him deal with the fallout from that, because it's as you say, you want your character to continue to grow. I don't want to just ignore what happened in the last book. I want that to be part of his personality now going forward.
So here's a question for both of you, because you have written about the same character in a previous incarnation. At what point do you think might you be driven to want to write a book that takes place before you start a prequel? Because now that you've developed this character and you've drawn on his past and so forth, there's really interesting stuff you could explore that you certainly couldn't do before you started writing the character.
Meaning Van's younger life and exploring that. Well, in a way, because the first 3 books in particular have what I call interstitial chapters, which are showing Van at younger ages, going through adventures and learning things that, of course, tie into the present day along the way. So, to a certain extent, I feel like I get to write that, which is a lot of fun. I veer slightly away with that with this book because it is so Ranger-centric. It was a much easier, rather than have those interstitial chapters, to have him simply be talking to people or remembering his experiences in Ranger selection or in Ranger school.
Right. Well, I asked you that question because you've used that technique, but there are an awful lot of people who've written series that, when Charles Finch was here, he's in book 2 of a 3-book prequel. And I have my own author here the other night, and now that she's done 10 books about this character and drawn it to a close, now she's thinking about writing a 3-book prequel, because there'd be, wondered if 3 books was too many. It sounds like a prequel should just be like 8 books, but in point of fact, you could have a different character arc.
Right.
But you were writing your guy.
Yeah, well, see, I know exactly why authors love to do prequels. It's that when they started writing a series, they probably didn't realize all the things they wish they had done to the character to therefore give them more legs in the series, right? Yeah. And so if you can go back and give them the backstory you wish you had given them the first time and make it more interesting.
To them. That's sort of the point. Until you've created it.
Until you've generated the interest. Yeah, because who's actually interested in this guy's backstory? No one, right?
Right. But I think looking back over, even Reacher had a bit of a prequel in his last book. It was about his dad and early life and so forth. And Connolly wrote a prequel in book 4 essentially when he had Harry investigating, the murder of his mother. So I think it's almost irresistible if you're writing multiple books about a character to want to explore not just going forward, but also kind of how they came to be the character that you picked up at some moment in their life, right?
And there might come a time when I write a complete book that is a prequel or is a sort of a flashback along the way. But I feel like I'm getting to draw from that well a little bit now in these sort of short stories.
You allowed for it, which I thought it was an interesting technique. The way that you decided to do that. Maybe we should take questions.
Sure.
Since we have this lovely audience. Any of you have questions you'd like to ask?
Beware the woman with the notebook in here.
I'm a writer too. So, Brad, can you talk a little bit about your undercover prison experience for your research?
Yes, I was not undercover though. Yes, I did visit. So I sent Tommy to the Federal Corrections Institute in Morgantown, West Virginia, which is a real place. And the Federal Bureau of Prisons was just happy to have me come in there, believe me.
Yeah?
No, not at all. I had to stay on them for about 2 months.
Really?
And I think they finally realized I just wasn't going to go away. Because they rejected my request to visit the first 3 times at least. And I was finally going through obscure Bureau of Prisons policy manuals to be able to find the language that I could use against them to be like, no, look, see, your own procedures say you have to do this. And so they finally let me in. So it's actually, I had been to prison. I had been to prison lots of times. I actually did say that at the book launch party earlier this week. And my poor mother, who was in the audience, just starts shrinking. She's like, Bradley, it's bad enough that you're a dirty crime fiction author. Do you have to say this in front of our friends? Anyhow, I'd been to some state prisons in New Jersey that are the kind of places your blood pressure rises as soon as you walk through the door, and it does not go back down until you see that prison in your rearview mirror and you made it out okay. And FCI Morgantown is not that. It is, as you approach, the most daunting barrier you see is this little split log fence. leading to the joke in the book, it looked like Abraham Lincoln was in charge of security, right? There are seriously no walls at FCI Morgantown. None. No, because it's minimum security, and the deal is you want to go ahead and run away? Okay, go ahead. But when we catch you, you're not going back to minimum security. You're going back to maximum security or medium security, which is like going back 10,000 years in evolution, because that's where you get the gangs, the violence, the tribal stuff with, whites only eat with whites. So like at FCI Morgantown, there's none of that stuff. Like everybody eats together. Because, they're a nonviolent offender. They're all there for less than 10 years, so they can kind of maybe see that there's going to be life outside of prison someday. But for me, that was very much...
Plus they tack on 5 years for...
They tack on 5 years for the escape. Yeah. But it was very much kind of a conscious storytelling choice, because I did know about prison, and I did know what a brutal place it can be. And I didn't want this book to really be about the brutality of prison. Like, it was more about kind of the cat and mouse game, and can you get these documents, and befriending the, And also, at a certain point in the book, you come to realize that, like, wait a second, there are no walls, which means there's nothing to prevent Tommy from getting out, but there's also nothing to prevent the cartel from getting in. And so I liked having that sense of danger being from the cartel itself. It also, in a practical standpoint, allowed me to do a lot of shenanigans of, like, and this is actually something FCI Morgantown inmates really do. They do what's called running the hill, because there's this big hill that backs up behind the prison. And so, say they want to, be able to bring in a little, hash or bubble gum or, whatever. They just arrange for somebody. There's seriously a city park at the top of the hill, just on the other side of the hill, and so they just they just take a really there's some open turf you got to cover, and that's why they run it. And they take off like hell in the middle of the night and run up there, and they make their buy, and then they run back, and that really does happen. But that just makes for some fun, because there's some danger there, but it also allows for that interaction with the outside world, and also interaction among the inmates. Because I need Tommy to become best friends with Mitchell Dupree, the banker, and he can't do that if they're all locked in their cells for 23 hours a day. So this kind of allows a lot of interaction. Really, the place looks like kind of a rundown community college where everybody wears khaki, and that's what it is.
Interesting. Wow.
So
you
so I
wonder
did.
if Running the Hill is going to change some after your book.
Yeah.
After it gets out.
No, I think they know about it. So
it might be just a release valve for the pressure.
It's interesting. You get the sense of, and I did mention this in the book, like the COs there, the corrections officers, they want to appear to be doing the right thing, but a lot of times they also just don't want to be bothered. So if it can happen, I'm not saying they totally turn a blind eye, but I think there's an attitude of and I didn't get this from any official source in any way, obviously, but it would cost so much money to adequately police these guys so that they can't do that kind of thing, and really, it's not worth it. Because the prison's pretty safe, it runs pretty well.
Right. Nobody's escaping, nobody's getting shanked.
Yeah, exactly.
Everybody goes home at the end of the day.
If somebody wants to run up the hill and get a little hooch or whatever, no skin off their back. As long as they don't have to know about it. As long as they're not confronted with it. And so that's another thing. All of these guys, they have contraband hidden all over that prison, And so this is more, you get the, there's a lot of these, God love message boards. You just they're just the best thing ever.
Yeah, I use those a lot too.
Oh, yeah,
for the
man.
special operations communities and things like that.
Yeah, well, and ex-prisoners, they do the same thing. I got tons of stuff from Reddit. God bless Reddit.
So is there a cell tower on top of this hill? As long as they're renting around, surely they all have phones.
Well, there is actually in the plot an inmate who has a phone, and that becomes a dangerous thing. Yeah, and yeah, I don't want to give away too much. Yes, cell phones do become part of the plot at one point.
All right. Another question? Everybody's...
This is for both of you. We enjoy reading you guys, so I'm just curious who you guys were reading.
Oh, sure. Well,
Look around.
yeah.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, he was asking who are we reading these days?
Oh.
Let's see. I just
Lisa Gardner.
Yeah, Lisa Gardner.
Meg Gardner.
Megan Abbott. Renee Gardner, definitely.
Yeah. Oh, Allison Galen.
Laura
I
Ryan.
can't even get out of female authors whose last names start with G.
Yeah.
Finding authors I love. So.
Yeah, I just read just read one of Mark Billingham's novels from the Tom Thorne, Detective Inspector Tom Thorne in the UK. One of my favorite UK writers. Ian Rankin, Rebus. Meg Gardner. I haven't caught up with her latest unsub novel,
Right.
but the first one was fantastic.
Yeah, it was great.
Along the way. Laura Lippman's Sunburn is really good. And Lou Berney's November Road. I loved a lot. That was fantastic. It's a great crime / character novel. It's a great one.
Yeah, but I think honestly, yeah, I read everything in here, and I think I'm biased deeply, of course, but I think the crime fiction genre is the strongest it's ever been. I mean, in terms of the diversity of voices, in terms of the different kind of stories that are out there, and just in terms of the skill, like just on a very simple nuts and bolts writing level. There are a lot of really, really skilled authors doing this right now, and which is, I think, to our benefit. I mean, one of the things that makes the crime fiction community cool is you kind of very quickly figure out that, like, we are together creating an entertainment product, right? And you guys, can you read more than a book a year?
Oh,
Yeah.
yes. Oh, yeah.
I can't write more than a book a year, right?
No.
Or maybe a book every 8 months, but hey, basically a book a year. And so, like, because of that, like, I need Glen. So I'm psyched when I'm reading Glen's book, and it's an awesome book, because, like, I want you spending more time with crime fiction. I want you spending more time with a book in your hands, and not more time with Candy Crush in your hands, right?
Yeah.
So, like, because that's the competition,
Yeah.
or it's Netflix, or it's whatever. And if we together give you a product that is transports you, that gives you that magical, wonderful experience that only reading does, it's a win for us.
Yeah, I kind of building on that a little bit, if you'll pardon the tangent for a minute. I started writing about 10 to 12 years ago, but I got serious about it about 5 to 6 years ago when I went to Thriller Fest, and that was the first convention I'd ever gone to. And in short order, went to BoucherCon, went to Left Coast Crime, went to others from there. And the community
Yeah.
of crime fiction writers and mystery writers in general was so warm and so welcoming and just amazing. Like, name authors, neophyte authors taking their first class, everybody, just wonderful people. And I was just like, well, I want to be part of this. This is great. It might be ages till I'm published. Unfortunately, it wasn't. But still, just wanting to be part of that community was just a big draw for me of keeping with it.
I always remember what Mystery Mike said to me in my very first BoucherCon. He said, "Kid, there are 5 assholes in this whole business. Just don't be number 6 and you'll be fine."
Did he name the 5?
No, but we know.
He has a bookmark with them printed.
Actually, I think the point they're making is it's not a competitive community.
Yeah.
There is room, as Brad said. People who enjoy the genre read a lot of it, and you can only write so much of it. So people try to help each other. It's really fun. We started a foundation, actually. It's an actual 501c3. Poison Pen Foundation, which I've got to do something to raise the money. But the point of it is that we're using the money to nurture new writers. So we don't want everybody to age out and you be left with romance or whatever. No, seriously, it's harder and harder for a new writer to get traction and so forth and support. So we're working on various ways to do that. One way, which is really very nice, is to bring a published author in to host a newer author. So Monday night, Ken Kruger is going to come in and host a debut author called John McMahon. So Kent has a lot of fans that will come to see Kent and coincidentally meet the new author.
Can I say something about John for a second?
Sure,
John McMahon?
absolutely.
John and I were members of the same writing group for 10 years. I know
Oh, wow.
John really well.
Huh.
I know the book really well because I saw it in a variety of forms as he's been writing
The
it in
Good
that character.
Detective, it's called.
And The Good Detective. It is an excellent book. Wonderful read. Just got a wonderful review in the New York Times by Marilyn Stasio. And John's a terrific person, and I think you'll really enjoy that book.
I have already.
I know, so-
But you guys get to.
y'all. I think y'all
Right.
will really enjoy
But
that.
my point is, that more people will be exposed to John because Kent is going to be
Yes.
here than if, so anyway, that's just one of the many things that we're doing, and I hope it will prove to be effective. I'm actually talking to ITW about them picking somebody to, be like an intern. Because one of the things they don't tell you when you are, it's hard to find someone when you're a new author who will actually walk you through going to do a book event. How does it work and what's the best way to go about it? And, it's painfully easy for some people to alienate an audience or piss off the bookseller, which is equally unwise.
Yes.
By making fun of her for asking where do you get your ideas.
No, I walked right into that one. No, but I did admit to my greater sin, which was not remembering your title. That was all okay. Yes, ma'am.
You're going to end up with the sixth name on the bookmark.
I always think that, I love words, and I always think that authors are painting with words. How do you choose your lexicon?
Ooh, that's a really good question.
Choose our lexicon. Okay, I'm gonna take a crack at this. Might be a wild swing. Because I'm writing first person, I have to use the vocabulary that Van would use in painting that, and I've got to see the world through his eyes, which is not the eyes of me, who is a number of years older and does not have Van's background, right? So while Van's thought processes are very much mine, in many ways, I don't look at the world the same way he does, and my vocabulary is different than his would be. So if I'm picking particular words or putting them in the mouths of other characters along the way, every character has got a different viewpoint, and I've got to pick how they're seeing the world and the words that they use very carefully, very specifically along the way. And Tommy's first person in your book along the way, and he's seeing it very differently than, say, Herrera or other characters.
Yeah. And certainly very differently than Van would. Mm-hmm. I mean, Van, even though Tommy works out a lot, I think Van could probably crush Tommy. Poor Tommy.
But he wouldn't.
No, he wouldn't. No, he's a nice guy. So, for me, what you're really talking about is voice to me. And to me, this is what voice is. When you first start writing, so writing is really nothing more than articulating thoughts on paper, right? But when you first start, there's this really thick filter between your brain and the page, and you just kind of can't get it to come out right? But then the more you write, the filter thins out and thins out and thins out until it kind of just vanishes. And it's really just your thoughts kind of going straight down, unfiltered, and then it's a case of, I think, a lot of editing. So I always have a phase of editing where I read my stuff out loud, because I want to know.
Me too.
And by the way, I do the voices. I do it. I might not do them well, but because every character I have, I can close my eyes, I can see them, and I can hear them, right? And so I'm reading that out loud, and suddenly, if I feel like I've made them say something or think something that is just not germane to them, that is not naturally them, I go, hopefully it could, that's that little, oh, that's not right, okay, and I can somehow hear that. So it's a lot about really how it sounds. I'm very excited that audiobooks are doing as well as they're doing, because I definitely want it to sound good, and hopefully
there's a phrase that comes up in that writing group that came up a lot, which is I'm hearing the writing, or I'm hearing the writer, as opposed to I'm hearing the character.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Where suddenly the writer's voice just sort of shoves its way in, and the character gives a paragraph of exposition on a particular viewpoint that has no real place, right? That's hearing the writing.
So you have to become increasingly less self-conscious to reduce that barrier.
Right.
It works out. I'm always interested when I go to conventions and so forth, how many fans come up to me, and what they always say is, "You're the one who writes to me." They say, "You write to me." And I think, it's hard to make it really sound personal when you're writing to 20,000 people, but, you have to just assume it's a person and talk to them as though I'm sitting right here talking to you. And to do that, you have to get less self-conscious about how it is. And just to wind up, I will say one thing. I tell you one thing I often say to people that I edit. Plot can be fixed, characters can be developed. There's one thing an editor cannot help you with: if you're boring. But everybody defines boring differently. So one voice may just not work for you, and another voice really may. So there's also that quality too, and you should never, as a reader, feel self-conscious if you're reading a book that has gotten a lot of praise, or an author who's a bestseller or something, and it isn't working for you, and you think, must be something wrong with me. No, it isn't. It's just that voice is not speaking to you, you know, and that's okay. And the other important part of that is when that happens, don't finish the book.
Oh,
There are
yeah.
way too many other books out
Oh
there for
my
you to
gosh.
read.
Yes.
Look
So
around,
if you're
yeah.
like 50 pages in and you're going, you know, put it away and read something else, because you know every book you read is a book you didn't read. Just like for them, every book they write is a book they didn't write. So it's and what is an investment? It's a lost opportunity.
Right.
Right. So it works the same thing. So Patrick King, I'm going to ask you to man the camera there. I'm going to say goodbye to our Facebook audience.